All right, we're live. Welcome everyone to another edition of AssetMule's Office Hours. I'm Justin Dorfman, one of the co-founders of AssetMule, and today I'm super excited to welcome Josh Budman of Noble to the Office Hours, and we're going to be diving into a topic that I think everyone is really interested in these days. And that is AEO and GEO, really demystifying what this new category is and how AI is impacting search and how AEO and GEO differs from what we've been sort of doing the last decade or so with SEO. We're all trying to figure this out, and Josh and team over at Noble are deep in this work. So I'm really excited, Josh, to get your perspective and pick your brain on this new category. Anyone who's listening, if you have any questions, I'll be monitoring the comments. You're probably watching this on LinkedIn or YouTube, so those will come in to us. So feel free to ask any questions, and I'll sprinkle them throughout. I have my own questions as well that I'll be throwing in here. And if you're watching this post live, on the recording, and you have a question, don't hesitate to add your comments in there. I'll be monitoring those, and if you tag myself or Josh, we'll be able to answer those after the fact as well. But Josh, welcome to the show. And yeah, for those that aren't familiar with you and Noble, I think it'll be a great place to start. Just maybe give them a little bit of a background on yourself and what you guys are working on at Noble.
Awesome. Yeah. And can you still hear me okay? All good? Sound
Yep.
is good?
Yeah, all good. Yeah.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the intro, Justin. And of course, thanks so much for having me. And I'm glad for anyone and grateful for anyone that's listening. So I'm Josh Budman. I'm one of the co-founders and the chief technology officer of Noble. I have a background of about a little over 11 years working on machine learning startups. I started my first company in 2014, right out of my graduate degree. It was a healthcare IT focused machine learning company. So I've been doing machine learning and deep machine learning and building ML apps for a very long time, basically since graduating from college. And so the original idea of Noble was to try to leverage, and Justin is very familiar with this, to try to leverage word of mouth to, one, help buyers make better purchasing decisions, and two, help companies use their communities of customers to help sell their products and drive conversions. We had a lot of traction for that idea initially, but what we saw is, especially across 2024, and that's the trend has just continued more and more, which is, I think, where we got to where we are today. LLMs have started to effectively absorb all web traffic. So going to a company's website now is typically a very high intent activity that only takes place after engaging in a very long conversation with a large language model like ChatGPT or Perplexity. And of course, Google has added their AI overview. So the impact of LLMs and the change in search cannot be understated. And so we are still very interested in helping buyers make these buying decisions. But what we saw is that buyers are just making decisions less so by talking to their peers, at least for the vast majority of those decisions, and more so by talking to large language models. And so we went back to the drawing board, tried to figure out exactly how these LLMs were surfacing information, did a ton of research, and we realized the best way for us to make an impact as a company was to try to figure out the citations that the LLMs were using. And we'll get more into all of this, I'm sure, Justin. Figure out those citations that the LLMs were using for surfacing responses to prompts and try to affect those citations. So that's what we do as a company now. Noble helps brands get mentioned in the articles that LLMs cite. And so we have dove very deeply into the space for the last 4 or 5 months, which is not much older than the space, not much younger, I'd say, than the space itself. And so happy to answer any general questions about AEO, GEO, about what our company does and about what we're seeing in terms of trends. We've been doing a lot of stuff very manually, automating a lot of it, but I have a lot of firsthand experience now. So happy to answer any questions from you or obviously the listeners.
Yeah, it's a cool story, and your journey. First of all, kudos to you and Raul for making the pivot. I know as a founder myself, not easy to do, right? When you have some traction and so on. But I think this space that you're heading into is such a, it's going to be a huge space, right? I mean, if we've seen how big SEO had an impact on purchasing, and now I've seen it in my own buying behavior, right? Like I ask ChatGPT everything when I'm like researching and exploring products. This summer, I was in Europe with my family on vacation, and from which restaurants to go to like, where to stop on the way to different places, to like certain products that I was thinking about buying, everything was through ChatGPT. So I can't, you're right, you can't understate the impact this is going to have on search. And I think you guys are tackling a huge problem and question that everybody has, which is how do we get noticed and discoverable in this new world. Now these terms, right, AEO, GEO, they're relatively new to most people. So, how would you describe AEO, GEO? And also, one question I personally have, is there a difference between AEO and GEO, or are these just sort of two terms for the same thing?
Yeah, I'll take the low-hanging fruit first. So the short answer is no, there's no difference between those two terms. And I think the industry hasn't fully embraced a single term. I think if you look at some of the leading authority in search and search visibility and measurement, one of the perfect example is Tim Sulo from Ahrefs. He has posted many times asking how people would reference the term. Is it AEO or GEO? Guy Illy from Webflow, same thing. I think so. AEO stands for Agent Engine Optimization. GEO stands for Generative Engine Optimization, but they both mean the same thing. They're an extension or a bifurcation from SEO, Search Engine Optimization, which is effectively discovery, and just it kind of tells you the surface in which you're being discovered. So SEO is obviously the genesis of the terminology. SEO being how you get discovered in search engines, and the vast majority of that is describing how you get surfaced in Google search. Now with AEO and GEO, it's how do you show up in the answers that these LLMs, large language models, are surfacing? So ChatGPT, Perplexity, those are the main ones with what's called web search or RAG, retrieval augmented generation capabilities, where you're actually pulling live data from the web. Newer versions of GPT, Google AI Overviews, Perplexity are kind of the main sources there, as well as Grok. And so I like GEO because I think it sounds a bit better. I think what I've heard is maybe just in terms of consistency, makes more sense to use AEO because search engine is what the previous embodiment was. It was a search engine, and the LLMs are effectively agent engines, and so that maybe makes more sense for consistency purposes. But all in all, I think it's more of a branding thing. And honestly, when I post about it, just to make it very simple and to not have to explain the acronym every time because it's so new, I just say AI search. I think AI search actually is a much more descriptive term for it. I just think that that's not as parallel to SEO. Doesn't you can't make the tie as explicitly, but it does
Yeah.
describe it a lot better. So I use AI search, AEO, GEO interchangeably, and I would say the industry is actually still doing the same.
Okay, that makes sense, and it was one of the reasons why for the title of this I actually put AEO GEO is I didn't know. I figured that they were the same thing, and the way that I saw them being used, it was kind of interchangeable, but I wasn't sure which direction the industry was going with. But I'm sure it will sort itself out at some point. Let's dig into maybe AEO GEO versus SEO. And what are the main differences? I'm sure there's some aspects of search engine optimization that are also present in AEO GEO, but there's also a lot of differences, is what I've heard in how you can show up in these AI search results versus traditionally how you would tactically position yourself to show up in search engine results.
Yeah, 100%. And what I will start by saying is I am by no means an SEO expert. I want to make that very clear. SEO is a fairly old industry. It's been around since the early 2000s. And I just started learning in depth about SEO very recently as I got into AEO and GEO. The other thing I do want to say is I think it's I think it's naive to think that AEO and GEO rely on all the same principles that SEO does, hard stop, and there's no difference in the types of tactics you need to perform to be surfaced in an LLM versus to be surfaced in traditional Google search, which I'm sure we'll get into. But I would say, in terms of describing the differences, SEO, and I look at everything from a technical perspective because I have a technical background. And so SEO relies on keywords and the presence of keywords, as well as the presence of linking. So those are the two big things. So, when I say keywords, the main algorithm that most search engines, traditional search engines, use is called TF-IDF, term frequency inverse document frequency, which literally just looks at the frequency of a term in a document and surfaces those documents in order, in a hierarchy based on relevance. Search engines also care a lot about domain authority. So that typically talks about how legitimate a domain is. And one way to build domain authority is to have backlinks, so links from other sites referencing your domain. And so that was the traditional playbook. And again, I'm not an SEO expert, so I'm not going to go into a long rant or a long description about what SEO is. There's a billion people out there that will know that better than me. But that is effectively what SEO was. And there were all sorts of tactics around, like I said, backlinking, putting keywords in the right places, guest posts, content that drove the way you ranked in Google searches, and you wanted to rank as high as possible. Now, with AEO and GEO, it's it's just algorithmically extremely different, which is why I think it's also naive to say that AEO and GEO is a scam. There are scam artists in every industry. In every single industry, you'll find a scam artist. But just mathematically, there's math and literature that just shows how different showing up in an LLM is from showing up in traditional Google search. So the way that LLMs with web search surface information is they have their LLM software is scraping the internet at all times. So ChatGPT has GPT agent, which is scraping basically every website on the internet. And it also has an existing corpus of data. Their algorithm, the models are trained every 3 to 6 months. No one really knows the frequency. And so when you ask a question to an LLM with web search like ChatGPT, the first thing it does is it parses that question and it tries to find about 100 or 1,000 bodies of content from all of these pages that are relevant to that answer. And then it uses its model to generate a very determined answer to that question. But the big thing is, how do you show up in that first set of what I call candidates to show up to drive that answer? So that's what GEO is about. It's about trying to predict what questions your prospective buyers are asking, or your prospects in general are asking, and then trying to figure out how to show up in those answers as best as possible. So totally different. It's not just about keywords. It's about content structure, and it's about where you are. You want to be in more places. That's the moral of the story. It's backlinks are nowhere near as important now as they were in the SEO days.
Makes sense. And that was a really, really good description, I think, of both. Very clear in terms of, the different approaches that they're taking. Now let's talk a little bit about influencing the AI search results. So, how would you go about doing that, right? If I let's say AssetMule, right? I want to make sure that I'm showing up when people are talking about sales enablement tools and digital sales rooms and things like that, and asking questions of ChatGPT. How does somebody go about positioning themselves to show up in that summary result?
Yeah, I think there are 3 key pillars of it in terms of actual interventions you can take. One is just your own site's content. The GPT agents that are scraping the internet are optimized for various things about web page performance. So, and there's companies focused on this, redesigning your website to make them your site LLM optimized. There's all sorts of little tactics you can take, but fundamentally the LLMs are, because they're scraping, they care about how quickly your web page loads and the content structure. So they want to see things like actually authoritative voices. So real citations help drive the content that LLMs cite with high priority. Just in terms of using active voice versus passive voice, little things like that can actually impact the priority that LLMs give when they when they surface information. And so you really, ideally, you would want a minimal site that is very descriptive and has a lot of citations on your own
Mm.
page. So that's one pillar, is just affecting your own site's content. The other one is forums. And so because LLMs care a lot about the citations and real human voices talking about things, actually, and we can get into this later, but LLMs do care a lot about real human organic content, much more so than AI generated content. So things like forums, Reddit, Quora, of course, I'm sure we've all seen a lot about how impactful those are. ChatGPT especially cares a lot about Reddit and Quora, and I believe ChatGPT and Reddit have some sort of data partnership, just because it helps drive ChatGPT's algorithm so much. So one is your own site, two is the forums like Reddit and Quora, and there are a bunch of others. Those are the big ones. And then three, maybe the most impactful just across the board for all the LLMs, is just third-party sites. So blogs, content listicles that companies are posting on their sites, or maybe the listicles that reviews that certain bloggers are posting. Those are by far the most impactful. That actually drives probably 90% of LLM answer generation across all of the LLMs. And so those are very hard to influence because there's a lot of them and it's a very long tail. But domain authority isn't the key anymore. So it's not like you just need to reach out to Forbes, Fortune, New York Times, get posted in those, and you're good, because that's how Google was working in the old Google search days, was looking at domain authority. Domain authority still matters, but it's sheer volume and how organic and differentiated that across that volume of content your content can be. And so ideally, you want to seed your content into all sorts of different sites across the internet and have that content be at least reviewed by a human. So those are really the three ways: your own site, forums, and then these third-party long tail posts.
Would you say that quality of content is more important in the AEO GEO world? And what I mean by that is, I felt like we were getting to a place with SEO, especially with on-site content. Like maybe it's different third-party content, and like getting mentioned in Forbes and all of that stuff. Domain authority it is a little bit different, but on-site, if you were, I started to notice going to people's blogs, it was less about quality content and it was more about just like keywords and like, listicles and all this stuff that maybe isn't actually that valuable, but just like, is SEO optimized. Do you think that the way that AI search works, it like is quality more important, or are we going to see a move towards better quality content?
Yeah, I think just by definition, quality is more important because GEO and AEO prioritize actual chunks of content versus just keywords. I mean,
Yeah.
again, this is the reason why this field is just mathematically not a scam, is because mathematically it's different. The way this information is being surfaced mathematically, algorithmically is different now versus before. And so just by virtue of needing to prioritize large bodies of text, bodies of content versus stuffing words in here and there and hoping for the best, I do think we'll start to see better quality content. Now that begs the question, can we just AI generate a bunch of content and hope for the best? The answer is, and this is a hypothesis, but it's grounded in math, I believe no. LLMs, like every other machine learning model, are trained on data, and the best type of training data is data that actually matches a nice organic distribution of reality. And so imagine and this is just a hypothetical, but imagine you just post the same content sample across thousands of pages across the internet. That is not a good way to train a mathematical model. It would be like trying to train a machine learning algorithm to determine the difference between a cat and a dog, but only showing it the exact same picture of a cat each time. It'll never be able to produce nicely generalized content, and it just will down prioritize you in the results. And so I think having organic content across a bunch of different pages, or as organic as possible, at least with a human review step, and just making sure that it matches your brand voice, is going to be essential. I really hope we don't get to a place where the LLMs start to prioritize LLM generated content, and mathematically just frankly doesn't make a ton of sense that would happen.
Yeah, it makes sense. And what also is interesting about sort of your explanation on how it works and how to impact it, in a way, I mean, let me know if you agree that it feels like there's some leveling of the playing field here a little bit, right? In the sense that not only is it like disruptive and there's like a new race to the top in a way. I mean, there's content on the web already, so it's not like they're starting from zero, but there is a way to learn about this new space and how to show up and sort of dive in first before maybe some of the bigger players that move a little bit more slowly. But also you mentioned sort of the organic channels that you want to get mentioned in the long tail, right? Versus the domain authority channels like the Forbes and so on. So,
Exactly.
a startup that maybe is less likely to get mentioned in Forbes than a large established company actually now has maybe a little bit more of a play, right? And showing up in these search results.
Yeah, no, I think that's a completely fair take. I think, instead of having to convince one of the big publishers to write about you, which is almost impossible. I mean, of course, and no affront to them. That's the business model. That's the traditional publisher, high domain authority publisher business model. Now you can try to figure out what sources are actually driving the LLM responses, reach out to them, get cited, maybe a reverse mention, because in theory, now because this long tail set of publishers is being honored by the LLMs, it might come down to transactions or agreements between small emerging companies and small emerging publishers. So it's actually creating a whole new economy that I think shifts some of the power, a lot of the power, away from the incumbents. Of course, again, incumbents can still win at this. There's no doubt, and I do think there's going to be a lot of defense that incumbents will need to play in this realm. But it does open the door for a lot of the folks at the long tail of both the publisher side of things and the brand company side of things.
Makes sense. And you kind of mentioned this a little bit, but like it seems like what I'm seeing is that the LLMs or the AI search engines, let's call them, right, are starting to sort of be used for different reasons. I was just seeing something in the newsletter that I was reading today that ChatGPT is being used more and more for personal, work or personal searches or use cases versus still for business, but it's used a lot personally for searching for products or like getting information versus, let's say, some of these other tools like Perplexity might be more for research, or Claude is more for coding, right? It seems like there's these like core use cases that are coming out
Right.
for each of these products. I guess that would also influence how you you'd have to understand how each of these differ, right? What are the sources that Claude uses versus ChatGPT versus Perplexity, and create content accordingly, right? So that you're not just showing up in a broad stroke of AI search results, but that you're really tuning yourself for the individual product that your target user uses, right? And that's a little bit different where like in the past, sure, there's like Bing and other search engines, but like the majority of search was coming from Google, right? So you're kind of like optimizing around one product and the way they do things.
Yeah, totally. And what I would say is beyond that, there's so many other. I think you're right. I think the actual engines and the way that the different LLMs are trained relative to one another plays a huge role, maybe the biggest role in the types of sites that are served up, the types of content and in their answers and the citations that drive that content. Like, I think anecdotally, just from what we've seen, and I think if you look at some of the literature published by the big AI visibility companies, this is corroborated, but Google AI overviews tend to prioritize the listicles. ChatGPT tends to prioritize the forums and has a bit of a preference for review sites. And Perplexity is a bit of a mixture between the two. Claude, you can do a web search, but you have to actually turn on a setting, and most people don't really do web search in Claude. And I think Grok maybe is falling a bit behind in terms of people wanting to actually do product research. But the big thing, there's other factors. There's like geography plays a big role. I think there's also, if you're logging into these LLMs with some sort of, if you're authenticating into them, there's other factors about you as a user that I'm certain the LLMs are using as part of the context window. And so I think the only way to predict all of this is to do a very robust set of searches across all the LLMs, try to effectively create a heat map of the sources that are being cited for a single brand. Like if I'm for Noble or for AssetMule, like if I'm looking for some prompt about digital sales rooms, for instance, like I don't just care about what shows up in ChatGPT. I want to run like 20 prompts and figure out which 10, 20 sites are being referenced the most in those 20 prompts across those 3 LLMs, because that gives me a data set of like 60 data points. And maybe there's 1 or 2 sites that are being referenced 14 times, if you count them all. So I think that heat map is really the best way to figure out where to reach out to. And like that, it's a ton of green space there. No companies are really doing this at scale. So I think, again, it's interesting, and it's going to create a whole new commercial landscape.
Yeah, this is actually a good segue into a question that we got, and one that I actually had as well. The question is, do you see this? I think it's becoming businesses in the near future. I think what the viewer is asking here, and by the way, if I'm off here, feel free to clarify in the comments. But I think, is there opportunities to create businesses that support this new industry or this new way of getting discovered, right? And if we look at the SEO landscape, right, you've got search engine optimization agencies that specialize in helping you optimize your own content, but also get mentioned by the publications with high domain authority, right? Or like they can like look at your website and help you figure out how to structure your content in a way. So there's like service providers, professional service providers, and then there's tooling too, right? We all know the Ahrefs and the Mozes of the world and the SEMrushes of the world that help you do keyword research, right? How do you think this shapes or shifts the landscape, right? Like, do we still have service providers? What do these tools look like? I know you're building your own tool set. Maybe you can give us like a broad stroke sort of bird's eye view of what the businesses that operate in this ecosystem look like.
Yeah, I think there's probably 2 sides to the industry as a whole, and then I think some businesses are kind of occupying either one side or both sides of that. So I would say the 2 sides are, and it's a good question. I think you interpreted it correctly. The 2 sides are visibility measurement, so just showing brands how well they're doing in AI search, GEO, AEO for the prompts, for a bunch of prompts of interest. There's a ton of companies that are doing that at some scale. So Profound is obviously the big one that I'm sure a lot of us have seen. They raised a bunch of money recently. I think they're kind of becoming the at least brand leader of the industry. There's Scrunch, there's Peak, PEEC, there's Athena, there's Evertune, there's Otterly, there's a whole bunch. I can probably name a bunch more. And Ahrefs and SEMrush also have their own tools that do this type of measurement. And then there's the interventions. So there's suggesting updates you can make to your own site's content, and maybe even performing those updates for you. Again, a lot of those visibility tools like Profound and Scrunch are doing that now. They're trying to restructure site content. The one that we know very well personally is AirOps. They work with a lot of big brands. They focus much more heavily on the intervention piece, trying to restructure on-site content to make sure it's optimized for LLMs. So that's kind of one set of intervention companies. There's what Noble does, and I don't know about our entire competitive landscape. I think we're fairly unique here right now, but I'm sure there are going to be more entrants very soon. Is we help, like I mentioned in the intro, we help brands get cited in the listicles and blogs and eventually forums that the brands care about, that where the answers and their prompts they care about are pulling from. So that's what Noble does. So the 2 types of companies are the visibility and intervention. And I think some companies are doing a mixture of the 2. I think there's probably 50 times more than even the ones I just mentioned. And I think more will definitely emerge over time, even more types of companies. But those are the 2 types that I can see right now.
Yeah, it makes sense. It actually, I mean, for how young this space is, it's pretty wild how many players there are already
Totally.
going after this. Like that's
Yeah.
pretty wild. Looks like we have another question, a follow-up question here. How do you think a non-tech guy like myself, but super curious and quick to learn, can add value in exchange of business? Oh, interesting. Yeah. Um, like where do you think the opportunity maybe is as somebody that's eager to become involved in this industry? Would you say maybe like is there a services component, maybe a gap between where the SEO agencies of the past are and where this is going, that somebody that is looking to kind of stake their claim can take advantage of?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best, and the adage I would use to describe the space right now is we're 5 minutes past midnight. Like literally, we've just started here. I think that even some of the most sophisticated SEO agencies that we've spoken to are still just dipping their toes in the water in terms of AI search. I think a lot of agencies, and I'm not blaming them. I think there's just a lot we don't know, but a lot of agencies and a lot of very high authority folks in the SEO realm are still questioning how much value there is in even doing work on the AEO side or GEO side. So what I would say is, like, if you can, one, perform a service, and two, prove that that service actually drives AI search visibility with a high degree of proof, I think that, and I don't think you need to be super technical. The question says a non-tech guy. You don't need to be super technical to do that. Like Otterly, for instance, you can start for free. And yeah, it looks like this our the viewer has a pretty technical background, technical enough to definitely to do what I'm describing. You could just get a license, like a license to Otterly, start doing some basic interventions, and see how that drives the results in a tool like Otterly. Like that's really all you would need to do, I think, to start to actually provide a meaningful service. So it's pretty simple right now. I think if anyone can prove that an intervention has an impact on visibility with high integrity, you will get paid for that. Is what I think. Just because there's a very large chasm between the actual math that we know is true and the interventions that drive meaningful results. We don't really know a ton about how much impact those have, besides experimentation and early anecdotes.
Yeah, super interesting. We got another question that popped up here, wondering how accurate it would be, Claude would be in designing a B2B AEO GEO strategy. Can't Claude just give us a plan and a recipe on quickest path to get listed? Interesting. So asking the LLM itself, like for a strategy on how you could get listed, or show up in results on that LLM.
I think the problem is that I think in theory that could do a better job than the vast majority of humans. What I would say is the industry is so new, and these LLMs are trained on historical data by definition, and so there's just not a lot of good data on a winning strategy here. And so my concern would be that you would just get a half-baked approach based on the limited data there is available. I'm pretty sure that is what would happen. And so again, it's not a bad way to start. I just don't know that it would be more meaningful than reading a bunch of articles, because there isn't that much out there, and crafting your own strategy.
Yeah, it makes sense. I have a question around where to get started, right? So I'm sure there's people listening to this that feel a little bit at a standstill, right? And I feel this way personally, where you're questioning SEO and the effectiveness of all the strategies that we used to do in the past, right? Should I still be writing all those listicles and competitive pages and blog posts and all those things? And should I be trying to partner with adjacent companies and get mentioned on their higher domain authority sites? Or like should I be looking into AEO and GEO, and like, or is that space moving so quickly that like I need to sit and wait and see how it all plays out? If you were advising me, let's say, today on, okay, like we've launched a new product. We launched one recently, followed up by AssetMule. We're
Yep.
trying to get sort of mentioned more in the digital sales room space. We have limited resources, right? It's me and two co-founders. Where should I spend my time to really position myself to show up in these AI search results? Where am I going to get the most bang for my buck? Is it producing content on our site? Is it going to Reddit and Quora and trying answering questions there? Is it something else?
It's a fantastic question, and I don't have I probably don't have the punctuating answer. What I would say, Justin, is you have a head start because your background is product marketing, and so the reason that gives you a head start is because the most important thing I feel in all of this is understanding your users and your prospects. That understanding, I think, with that understanding, I think the first step would be trying to guess at, and eventually there will be data around this, I think, as the LLMs start to sell some data around the prompts being typed in. But try to guess like which prompts you think are the most likely to be used to surface information or answers relevant to AssetMule, like generating maybe 50 to 100 prompts that you think are relevant. Some can be very simple, like, best digital sales rooms, right? Like that's an obvious one, but maybe go higher up in the funnel. Maybe you can get surfaced in prompts like best tools for a small business. The sky's kind of the limit. So I think number one is just figuring out which questions actually matter, because the prompts drive everything else. And then from there, what I would say is, again, I think visibility trackers are still reporting on data that is very flimsy. I think, I don't think they're lying. I just think the data that they report is flimsy because there's so many different parameters that can drive the result to a prompt, like we were talking about, the LLM, the geography, your user context, that sort of stuff. But using a visibility tracker, I think will give you a general sense of how you're performing as a business in those prompts. I think that's really the best way to do it. And whether you trust Ahrefs already, maybe you have a license and want to use their product to do it, or use one of the new entrants like Profound or Scrunch, up to you. But I think that's probably step two. I think that steps 1 and 2 are like a 2 to 3 week activity, or maybe 2 to 3 day activity. I think the rest of it is just like just trying to influence the citations. I think that's really the name of the game, is trying to figure out the places that you're missing, or the places maybe that you're present, but the content is incorrect, and trying to influence those. And I think most of this happens offsite. So whether that's forums or, blog posts, and that can be a lifelong activity, but I think that's the direction I would go. Again, these are distributions of content. It's not all about high domain authority and deterministic keywords and just hoping that you get on the right domain. This is about volume of good content. And so I think, like, again, just to reiterate, steps 1, 2, 3, knowing your users and generating those prompts. 2 is seeing how you stack up compared to your competitors. And 3 is going after those citations where the data is wrong or you're not present at all. So, I mean, I think anybody can do that pretty cheaply if you pick the right tools. And again, like I said, Otterly is basically free. I think Profound's a little more expensive. I don't know pricing, and I don't want to misquote myself, but I think those are the 3 basic steps I would take as someone trying to dip their toes in the space.
Very cool. I think those are 3 key steps that anybody listening to this could take pretty easily. So appreciate that. Any takes on where this goes in the next 2 to 3 years? I know it's hard to predict. 2 to 3 years is like, it feels like decades in the past in terms of the change that can happen. But any sort of unique takes, like something that maybe the average person isn't thinking right now on where search goes, discoverability goes in the future, and how to best position yourself for it? Or is it more just making these micro adjustments and trying to follow the path as it's being built?
Yeah, I think the big question, Justin, is whether or not the LLMs will start to incorporate some sort of ad strategy. Like, I think that's the big unknown with all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, 1, an ad strategy, and 2, if we'll be able to make purchases directly on the LLMs, because I think that turns things into a whole, it kind of starts a whole new ball game, if you will. I do think that I would be very surprised if there isn't a set of an ad network or the LLMs don't start to embrace an advertising monetization type strategy like Google did with purchasing keywords and placements. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but the interesting thing is, and I think there's already some ads being tested in this. I saw some post about ChatGPT just starting to leverage ads. But I think that's where this becomes extremely interesting and also changes the paradigm entirely, because ads are not going to look the way they were. We're not going to actually buy keywords. We're going to buy content chunks or answers, and and then figuring out exactly which questions people are asking is going to be super important. Like effectively you'll have a head start there. Product marketing, that's like what you have to do. So I think that's where this could kind of go from 0 to 1 in the next few years, is whether it becomes an actual ad network, and it becomes an ad strategy that people have to start buying into.
Yeah, and this could be a whole other office hour and thinking about the ramifications of that in terms of Google and what their play is in that world, in terms of even thinking about like Amazon and Shopify stores, if like things aren't being bought through those platforms but through the LLM directly. App stores and stuff, and discovering products is pretty wild, actually, like how far reaching that would be in terms of its disruption to the current ecosystem. So all exciting
Exactly.
stuff, a little scary too, but I think we're all in this trying to figure it out, and step by step. So appreciate you stopping by today to give us this view into AEO and GEO. If
Thanks,
folks
Justin.
want to connect with you and pick your brain more, or maybe learn about Noble as well, and maybe you can tell us, just to cap off here, you taught us a little bit about what you guys do, but maybe who you're building for and who benefits most from Noble. If there's anybody that fits that category listening, also, where can they find you? How can they connect?
Yeah, so feel free to reach out to me directly or connect with me directly on LinkedIn. I accept pretty much all new connections. My email is also josh@thatsnoble.com. So that's very tactically how to connect with me. My co-founder and CEO, Rahul, email is rahul@thatsnoble.com, was supposed to be doing this with you, but he just had his first kid and everything went well 2 days ago. So makes sense that he's not here. So just to, again, reiterate what Noble does, we help brands show up in the sources that LLMs are citing in their answers. Hard stop. That is what we do. We are not getting into the visibility space. We are an intervention. We broker all of the conversations with publishers at the long tail of publishers. So again, we avoid the Forbeses and New York Times pretty much. We speak to blogs and articles that you've never heard of, but that we know objectively LLMs are prioritizing. And the plug I will give is that our pricing model lends us to any type of company, whether you're just starting or a larger company, because we only charge if we get you successfully mentioned. So we're only effectively a price per success. It's outcomes-based pricing. So there's really no risk to signing up. And we actually do have a gap analysis tool that you can use to see which citations you're not showing up in, to kind of show you the impact we could have by reaching out to some of these folks. So again, we're just learning the space like everyone else is. We do know objectively and based on math that getting cited in sources that LLMs are citing is going to help, because deterministically we know that that's what's driving the answers. And so, I hope to connect with anyone that has questions. I come at this from the science and math angle. I'm not an SEO expert, but I have been studying large language models and transformers, the basis of large language models, since 2017. So I do feel I have a good grasp of the math that drives this, and I think the approach we're taking is grounded in actual science. So that's a plug to our company. But if you're not interested, you just want to talk LLMs, or you disagree with anything I said, I would actually love to hear it. The space is so new. I definitely don't purport to know everything, and I'm willing to learn from someone else. So that is my little pitch.
Yeah, well, I'm super excited to continue watching you guys on this journey. This was really, really valuable. Again, something that I'm personally thinking about all the time. these days is what's our play, what's our strategy in this space. So I feel like I'm leaving with a better grasp on it, and I'm sure a lot of other people are. So thanks so much, Josh. And who knows, maybe we do another one of these in 6 months, a year,
Sure.
when the space has changed even more and
Yeah.
we have even more insight into how to play in this game. But
Yeah.
appreciate it. And for anyone who's listening, thank you for your time today. Again, if you're listening to this as a recording, and you have any questions, drop a comment and we'll answer it after the fact. If you like what we covered here today, we do these office hours on a weekly basis, Wednesdays, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, covering all kinds of different GTM topics. And, definitely subscribe to AssetMule's page. We're always producing great content for go-to-market professionals, really to selfishly up our game, but also help everybody else out there that's trying to figure this stuff out. But until next week, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again soon.